Hello, and welcome to my guide for recording multi-track music videos for musicians. I will be referencing a Google document which I created a few days ago, which I will link in the video description, so you can follow along and try this yourselves. Alright, so step 0, we're going to want to download the following programs. So first we have Blackmagic's DaVinci Resolve, which will be our video editing workstation. Next, we'll want Cocos Reaper, which will be our audio editing workstation. And finally, VLC, which will be our video playback and conversion program. All three of these are free downloads. Eventually, Reaper will ask you to purchase a license, but it won't take away any functionality if you decide not to immediately purchase a license after the trial period. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select from any of the following gear combinations. So I've listed options here from simplest to most complicated. So option 1, we can choose a phone camera and a USB microphone. For option 2, we can go ahead and choose a Zoom audio and video recorder, so something like the Zoom Q2, the Q4, or the Q8. Or third, we can choose a phone camera and a Zoom recorder of any kind. That's the most similar option to what I've chosen here, which is to record video on my Fujifilm X-T3 and the audio on my Zoom Q4. Of course, you can make substitutions within this general framework. I just wanted to provide you with some examples using equipment that musicians might commonly have in their possession. All right, so today I'm going to go ahead and record the Danden Trombone Quartet, which is in 4 parts. And I'm going to end up wanting each individual part to be on its own quadrant of the screen. All right, so that will be my end goal for today. And the last thing we're going to do before we start is we're going to want to create an empty project folder. I'm going to place mine on the desktop. All right, and we're going to want to label it with today's date. So that's for me March 30th, 2020, so 2003:30. And I'm going to call this Trombone Quartet Project. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our Reaper session. So we're going to plug headphones into our computer. If you have a USB microphone, go ahead and plug that into your computer before we start up Reaper. All right, and now let's open Cocos Reaper. All right, now that Reaper's open, the first thing we're going to want to do is to create a new audio track. So we'll go up here to Track and insert new track. If we have a USB microphone plugged in, we're going to want to go to Options and Preferences. This will bring up this menu here, and we want to make sure we're in the Device tab in the Preferences menu. Under Input Device, we can click this menu here, and if we have a USB microphone plugged in, we should see it here. If we don't see it here, we can try switching between different audio systems, and then it may appear in one of the other input menus there. But for now, since I'm not using a USB microphone, I'll just leave it as it was by default. If we were using a USB microphone, we would also need to come in here to Track and select this little box here, and then select our USB mic as our track input. But again, since I don't have a USB mic plugged in, it's not appearing here for me. All right, so the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go into Project Settings, so File and Project Settings. So we are going to want to change our project's tempo to beats per minute. And I will be recording a movement of the Danden Trombone Quartet, which is pretty slow. I've decided that I want to set my tempo to 58 beats per minute. So right in here, I will enter 58, and my time signature is 2/4. And I'm then going to select OK. The next thing we're going to want to do is click here on this metronome icon here to enable the metronome. If we then right-click on the metronome, we're presented with a few more options where we can change things like the metronome volume for the primary and the secondary beats. You can also change things about the clicks that you're hearing. So if you want a longer click or a higher pitched click, you can change these settings in here. All right, the next thing we want to do, which is especially important if you're using a USB microphone, is you're going to want to come down here to Sound Settings. We can do this by right-clicking on the little sound icon. For Mac users, you're going to want to go into your System Preferences and go into Sound Settings. On Windows, this will bring up this menu here, and then you're going to want to go Make sure that the input device here is chosen correctly. If you have a USB mic, it should appear here. Since I'm just using my regular computer microphone, there won't be another option that appears here for me. So I'm going to click on Device Properties, and now I will have a microphone volume slider, which will pop up. And since I play trombone, I'm going to want this pretty low so I'm not overloading my microphone input. All right, so the final thing we want to do before we start is we want to save our session. So we're going to hit File and Save, and now we're going to get this menu which pops up. And I want to save this in my project folder that I created earlier. So I double click on that, and then I want to label our session with the exact same name. So 200330 and Trombone Quartet Project. Fantastic, so we are almost ready to start recording. So what we're going to want to do is record arm the track we just made. So we're going to come up here and click this little red button next to our track name. And so now it should be glowing red. And now we can see that we've got some signal coming in, which is always good. Always want to see that. If you don't see signal coming in, then we need to mess around a little bit more with some of our preferences to make sure that audio is coming in the way that it should be. All right, so now we want to take a second to turn on our video cameras, so on your phone. And I want to make sure that my zoom is on as well. So now they are both on. If we are recording with an external Zoom recorder, we want to make sure that the input gain on that recorder is set to pretty low. We definitely don't want to overload that mic input either. All right, and one final thing we want to do before we really get started recording is we want to check our pitch with a tuner. This will help us ensure that we have a final product that we can be proud of. All right, once we're all tuned up and we've got our instrument ready to go next to us, let's come down here and click this big red button to start our recording process. As soon as we do that, we should start hearing the metronome in our headphones. All right, there it is. I can hear it in my headphones. And so now we want to make sure that we are rolling on our camera and on our Zoom recorder. All right, once everything is recording, what we're going to want to do is clap or snap on the beat with the metronome a certain number of clicks before we start to play. So for this project, I'm going to go ahead and choose 8 beats before. So 8 beats before I play, I'm going to give myself a loud snap. And this will help us synchronize things later on when we go to edit. All right, so once I've snapped, I'm going to wait 8 beats, and then I'm going to begin my first take. If I happen to ruin a take, or if I miss a note or something like that, what I'm going to do is just wait a few seconds and then snap again, count another 8 beats, and then try again. That way I don't have to go through the whole process of stopping and starting the recorder every time. All right, so I'll see you back once we've recorded the first take. All right, so now I've gone ahead and completed my recording of part 1. So now what I need to do is I need to get the audio from my Zoom recorder into Reaper. If you were using a USB microphone, then your audio is already in Reaper, so your job here is already done. So my Zoom Q4 won't let me record only audio, so what I had to do is record video on my Zoom, and now I want to bring this into my computer. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my SD card into my computer, or you can just connect your Zoom to your computer using a USB cable. And now I should see a folder that pops up that looks like this, and now I can select Zoom Q4, DCIM 100 Zoom, and there I will see the video file that I just made. All right, that's what that looks like. I can move around, I can skip in. So I don't much care for the video that comes out of my Zoom. But what I do want from it is I want the audio. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my video file from my Zoom into the project folder, which I've made on my desktop. So I'm going to open my project folder and now drag in the Zoom video. All right, so now I can go ahead and close out of this. So what we're going to need to do now is convert our video file to an audio file. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to open this video file now in VLC. For my system, that's already the default, but if it's not for you, you can go ahead and right-click that file, select Open With, and now select VLC. And now our file should open. All right, so now we are going to convert this MOV file, this video file, into an audio file so we can bring it into Reaper. So we're going to go up to Media, and now Convert and Save. Now it's saying which file do we want to convert and save. So we're going to select Add, and now we're going to head over to our project folder, and we're going to convert this Zoom video file. Go ahead and click Open. And now convert and save. So now we'll be greeted with this menu. So now what format do we want our end file to be? So we don't want MP4, what we want is an audio only option. So we can choose here from MP3 or CD quality, that's a WAV. But since my video is just going to be uploaded to YouTube anyway and compressed there, I'm just going to go ahead and select MP3. All right, and now we have to specify our destination file. Where do we want this file to be saved? So I'm going to go ahead and click Browse and navigate to our project folder. And let's call this Part 1. Go ahead and click Save, and now Start. And now in VLC, we should see this progress bar appear along the bottom of the screen to let us know that it is working, and I will see you back when it's done. All right, it looks like my conversion has completed, so now I can close out of VLC. And now, when I go to my project folder, I should see this nice MP3 file. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we need to get this MP3 into our Reaper session. So we're going to go ahead and open Reaper again. And since I wasn't using USB microphone, I'm going to want to eventually replace this audio anyway, since it was just recorded with my computer's built-in microphone. So I can just go ahead and click on it and press delete, or I can go ahead and right click and select remove items. So now it's gone and I have room to put in my new MP3 file from my Zoom recorder. So let's drag part1.mp3 into this newly empty track. And fantastic, we'll see that it's renamed our track to part 1. All right, so you can see it took me a few tries to get a take that I was really happy with. So the only part that I really want to keep is this last take back here at the end. So what I can do is I can go ahead and grab the edge, the left edge here of my clip, and then drag it over to the right so that only the last bit here is left. And then I can click anywhere on the clip and drag that all the way back to the beginning. So now I've trimmed my audio clip. To zoom in and out of my Reaper timeline, I can go ahead and use my mouse wheel, or I can use my plus and minus keys on the keyboard. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to get this part1.mp3 lined up with the metronome so that when I go ahead and record the next parts, I still hear the metronome in time with part 1. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do to reposition our audio is click on this icon here that says grid line enabled, and that will leave us with grid lines disabled. So this will let us slide our audio around continuously instead of forcing it to align to a grid. So what now I need to do is I need to play this back and align my snap with a metronome beat. So I'm going to hit play. And we can hear that my snap is very much not aligned with the metronome. So I'm going to move my audio around and see if I can get closer to the beat. All right, we're in the right direction. That was pretty close. Let's see if we can get closer. All right, I think that's pretty good. So now if I keep listening, my playing should be aligned with the metronome now. All right, and we hear that it is. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and turn off record arm for this first track because we don't want to write over it when we go to do our second part. So let's click that little red button. And now we need to make a new track. So let's go ahead and go up here to track and insert new track. And now on this new track, we can click that little red button to record enable that track. So now if I move my playback head to the beginning of the session and then hit play, I can count how many metronome clicks there are before my snap. So now I know that the third metronome click is where I should be snapping when I go to record my next parts. So let's go ahead and turn back on our camera and Zoom recorder. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and leave our Zoom recorder and cameras running throughout this whole process of getting a take that we're happy with. If we mess up on a specific take, what we're going to do is pause our recording in Reaper, bring our playback head back to the beginning of the session, and then press record again. All right, once everything's ready to go, press record on everything, and I will see you back when we've finished recording part 2. All right, so I have now gone ahead and completed part 2. So I'm going to go ahead and plug my Zoom back into my computer. I'm going to go into my Zoom folder, and we're going to do exactly the same process we've already done. So we're first going to drag our video file from the Zoom itself into our project folder. Okay, so now we can close out of this window here. And now we are going to begin the conversion process. So we're going to go ahead and open with VLC. We'll pause that video there. So we're going to go to Media, Convert, Save, specify the file we want to use. So open our project folder, we're already there, and I want Zoom 13. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now I'm going to select my output format as MP3. And we want to save this in Trombone Quartet Project. And we will call it part 2. And now click save and start. And we see the progress bar going. Okay, so my file has been converted. I can close out of VLC, and in my project folder, I now see part2.mp3. So just like last time, we'll go into Reaper. We'll delete the track that was recorded with the computer audio. So I can go ahead and right-click Remove Items. Perfect. And now we can head to our project folder and drag part 2 into our timeline. Okay, and again, you'll see it took me a few takes to get this just right. So I'm going to drag from the left edge over so that I've just selected the last take that I want to use. And now we'll click and drag anywhere in the clip and drag it all the way to the beginning of our timeline. So now what we're going to need to do is align our 2 snaps, and we will find out how good I am at snapping in time with the metronome. All right, so it looks like I've got the waveforms of the snaps aligned here. All right, that sounds good. So now in theory, if I snapped exactly with the metronome, then my parts should now be aligned. All right, that's not too bad. So now we've got our first 2 parts recorded. Sorry, the first part was a little bit loud. I had turned up this volume slider here a little bit so that I could hear it a little bit more easily in the headphones. But now I'll turn it back down. Okay, so now let's get ready to record part 3. So let's turn off record enable for part 2. And let's make a new track by going track, new track. And let's record arm that. So now let's turn on our camera and our zoom recorder, and we'll follow the exact same process we did for part 2. And I'll see you back when part 3 is done. All right, so I've gone ahead and recorded part 3. Here it is in the Zoom folder, and let's go ahead and drag that over to our main project folder on the desktop. And you'll see that this folder is really starting to fill up with all of the clips that Reaper has been recording through our computer's microphone. All right, there it is, Zoom 14. So let's go ahead and open that in VLC. And we will go through the conversion process again. Select MP3. Output into our project folder, and we will call it part 3. Hit save and hit start, and I will see you back when that's done. All right, our conversion has successfully completed. So let's go into Reaper. Let's delete the track that was recorded with the computer audio. And now let's drag in our part 3.mp3. And once again, let's trim it so we're just using the last take. And now let's drag it back to the beginning of the timeline. Now let's line up these claps. Now, if my claps aren't 100% with the beat, which there's no guarantee that they are, there are some additional adjustments that we might have to make in terms of sliding one part left or right if I'm finding that that part is not with my metronome clicks. All right, so let's see how this is sounding. That might be crazy, but I think I'm hearing the second part slightly behind. Yep, so I'm going to go ahead and slide that very slightly to the left and see if that fixes the alignment. To make this a little bit easier on myself, what I'm going to go ahead and do is mute one of my tracks, and you'll see that when I click mute there, it grays it out. And this lets me focus on just the 2 tracks that I want to align. All right, the second part still sounds slightly behind. All right, I think that's sounding a lot better. So now I'm going to go ahead and mute the second track and just listen to the first and third tracks together. The claps are just really there to get you in the ballpark. If you haven't clapped exactly with the metronome, which I haven't here, then you're going to need to do some final adjustments. Yep, so the third part is definitely behind the first part here. So let's go ahead and drag that third part forward. Still sounding a little behind. All right, that's sounding a lot better. So now let's listen to all 3 at the same time. I've gone ahead and unmuted track 2. All right, and now we seem to be lining up with the metronome. All right, so let's go ahead and record the fourth and final part. So let's go ahead and disarm part 3 so we don't write over it. And let's come up to track and insert new track. And let's record enable that. Let's turn on our cameras and we're good to go. And I'll see you back when I've got part 4. All right, so I've just gone ahead and finished recording part 4. So let's go through this conversion process one last and final time. So let's open up our Zoom folder and we'll drag that over to our project folder. Fantastic, and let's open that up in VLC. Media, convert, save, add, Zoom 15, convert, save, audio MP3, destination, location is our project folder, and we will call this part 4. Go ahead and click save and start, and I'll see you back when it's done. All right, we've converted our file. We see part4.mp3 in our project folder. So let's go back to Reaper. Let's delete the file with the computer audio on it. Let's go back to our project folder and drag part4.mp3 into the session. We'll zoom all the way back out. We'll trim it so we've just got the last take. Bring it back to the beginning. Zoom all the way back in. Find those snaps. And let's align them. All right, let's see how close we are. All right, let's go ahead and mute all but 2 of our tracks so we can focus a little more clearly. All right, sounding like part 4 is behind, so let's slide it up. All right, we're sounding pretty close. All right, we are just about done with the audio portion of this. If we want to feel a little bit fancy, what we can do is we can come into this little knob up here on the channel strip, and we can pan each of our voices to a different part of the stereo field. This will give us a somewhat nicer stereo spread in the end. So let's go ahead and grab part 1 and move that over to the left. Part 2 will go just slightly over to the left. Part 3 will go slightly to the right, and part 4 will go more to the right. Now that we're done aligning, let's just go ahead and disable the metronome and see how we're sounding without it. And while we're at it, let's turn off record enable for part 4. All right, if we wanted to get even fancier, what we could do is we could open up the mix window under View and open the mixer, and that's where we could add effects like EQ and reverb and whatnot. But for now, I'm not going to bother with that. Right now, what we're going to focus on is exporting our stereo mix from Reaper so that we can use it in DaVinci. All right, so before we render our audio out of Reaper, what we're going to do is we're going to trim all of our audio clips so that they start at the beginning of the piece, so we don't have a ton of dead space before. So I'm just dragging each edge of each clip to the exact same spot. And let's do that with the ends too. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to group all of our tracks together so we can move them as a unit. So to do that, we're going to click on the top one and then hold down Control and then click on each individual clip to select them all, and then press G on the keyboard to group them together. So now we can just slide this whole block as a unit wherever we want. So let's go ahead and slide it to the beginning. All right, and now we are ready to render. So what we're going to do is go into File and Render, and this will bring up the render toolbox. All right, so first step, file name, let's call it Trombone Quartet Render. And where do we want it saved? We want to browse for directory, and we can choose desktop and our Trombone Quartet project folder. All right, and it will now output a WAV file, which is fine. And so we'll just go ahead and click render. All right, now that that's done, let's save our project, which we should have been doing all along. And now we're done with Reaper. All right, so now that our audio is completed, let's go ahead and gather all of our video files, either off of our phone, or in my case, from my Fujifilm camera. And I'm going to gather them all and drag them over into the project folder. If you were planning on using the video from your Zoom, then your job here is already done. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and open my Fujifilm folder on my SD card, select all my 4 video files, and then drag them over onto my computer into the project folder. All right, so now all of the video files that I want to use in the final product are in my project folder. So I'm going to go ahead and eject my SD card. If you are using an Android phone, you can just go ahead and plug your Android phone directly into your computer and you'll see a very similar file structure. You'll just go to the DCIM folder where all of your pictures and videos are normally saved. If you're using an iPhone, then just go ahead and open the Photos application on your computer and plug in your iPhone, and you should be able to import your videos from there. All right, now that all of our video files are in our project folder, let's go ahead and rename them. So the earliest one, the lowest number, the first one I did, I will call part 1, and then I'll rename parts 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so now let's go ahead and open up DaVinci Resolve. I will be back to you once the program is open. This may take just a couple minutes. All right, DaVinci Resolve is now open. So let's go ahead and click Create New Project. And let's title it with today's date, so 2003-30 Trombone Quartet, and click Create. Okay, so now we'll find ourselves in the Edit window of DaVinci Resolve. So in DaVinci Resolve, our workflow is laid out for us in this bottom bar here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the process in the Media tab. In this upper left portion up here, we can navigate through our computer's file structure, And then what we're going to do is we're going to drag those clips from our file structure into the media pool down here. So the easiest way to go about doing this is to open up our project folder and drag any file from that project folder into this upper left window up here. And this will tell Resolve to look into our project folder for potential files that we're going to want to use in our project. So really all I want to drag into the media pool is the 4 files from our video camera. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the other thing I want is I want the audio files that we rendered from Reaper. And so I'm going to grab that and drag it into the media pool as well. And so that's all we need to do in the media page. So let's move on to the Edit tab now. All right, so now that we are in the Edit tab of DaVinci Resolve, we want to go ahead and grab each individual video clip and drag it to a new video track. So we can go ahead and do this by just dragging it from the media pool up here and dragging it into the timeline. So now let's grab part 2 and make sure it's going into a new track. If you bring it down here, it'll just put it in the same track. But that's not what we want. So let's make sure we're dragging it onto a new track. And now part 3, and finally part 4. And so now let's go ahead and rename each individual track to what part is on it. So we've got part 1, part 2, part 3, and now I can scroll up with my scroll wheel, and now I see part 4. All right, now that all of our videos are in the timeline, what we're going to want to do is make it so that not all of our videos are stacked on top of each other. We want each video in its own quadrant of the screen. So what we can do is we can select all of our videos by clicking on each video while holding down Control, and this will select them all. So now we've got all of them selected. If the playback head is not at the beginning of the project, make sure that it's there now. Let's head up here to this inspector tool in the upper right corner. And now we will enter a zoom factor. And this will essentially take all of our videos and make them smaller so that they can all fit next to each other on the screen. So instead of 1 up in this box, let's enter 0.5. And now this should apply that zoom factor to all of our videos. So now we need to move our videos around the screen. So let's go ahead and select the part which is on top, which is always the highest numbered channel. So for us, that's V4. And so let's go ahead and click on the clip in part 4. And so what we can do now is we can either use the position sliders within the inspector tool for the X and Y axis, or what we can do, which you might find somewhat easier, is to go over to this little rectangle with dots on it, click the little caret next to it, and select transform. And so what we can do now is we can simply just click anywhere within that rectangle and drag it around. So this is part 4. So in the end, we're going to want this in the bottom right. So I'll drag this all the way down to the bottom right. Part 3 I'm going to want in the bottom left. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the clip in part 3 and then move it around to the bottom left. I'll do the same for part 2. I'm going to move that up to the top right. And for part 1, I'm going to want that in the top left. Okay. The other tool which you might find useful is the crop tool, which you can access by clicking on this caret here and selecting crop. And with this, if I wanted every video, instead of being a rectangle, to be a square, what I could do is I could select the crop tool, and then when I grab one of the diagonal corners, I'll just move it in. And instead of just resizing the video, it will actually add empty space around it. So then, if I go back to the transform tool, I could then move that around and the empty space will still be there. So I'm going to hit Control Z because in the end, for my video, for a quartet, I want them all to be equal rectangles, so the same aspect ratio that they originally were. All right, once all of the videos are arranged on screen in the way that we want, we can go ahead and trim the individual clips. so that we're only looking at the last take. For me at least, I was always using the last take. So we can use this slider over here to zoom in and out of our timeline, or we can hold down Control and use the plus and minus keys on the keyboard. So now if I grab the left edge of any one of these clips, I can slide that all the way over to the right so that I've only got selected the last take. And then I can select anywhere in the clip and drag that all the way back to the beginning. And you can really see the individual takes just by looking at the audio waveforms, and the higher the peak, that's where you're actually playing, and where it's flat, that's the rest between the takes. All right, so I'll go ahead and drag over part 2. And let's go ahead and do the same thing for part 3. We'll trim it and drag it. And for part 4. All right, so once we've trimmed all of our tracks so that we're only looking at the last takes, we're going to mute all but 2 of our tracks. So I'm going to mute 1 and 2. And what we can also do to make this a little bit easier on our computer to play back is we can turn off the video for those same tracks that we've muted by clicking on this little icon here. So I've muted audio 1 and audio 2, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the video for tracks 1 and 2. All right, so now that we've trimmed each of our tracks and we've muted all but 2 of them, we're going to go ahead and zoom in to the beginning of our timeline. I'll move my cursor over to the beginning, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to find those 2 snaps. And we're going to try to align those as best we can so that we'll be at least in the ballpark in terms of aligning our videos. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Okay, so you'll see that it looks like take 4 snapped before take 3. So I'll go ahead and drag part 4 over, and let's see if now we're closer to alignment. All right, that looks pretty good. I couldn't quite tell which came first. Actually, we can see it in the waveform down here. So you can see that part 4 is still slightly ahead, so let's zoom in even more. All right, let's see how we do now. Pretty good. Okay, so now we can move on to the actual content. I'm just going to let it keep playing, and we'll see if our video is in alignment now. All right, it looks like just as it is, we're in pretty decent synchronization. So I'll say for now, let's just go ahead and leave it there. So the next step is now to mute one of those 2 parts that we were using. So I'm going to go ahead and mute audio 4, and I'm going to now unmute audio 2. And in the same sense, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the video for 4, and I'm going to turn on the video for 2. In truth, we could be doing this by turning off all of the videos and just doing this by listening to the audio, because whenever we're moving the audio, we're also moving the video. But for visual sake, we'll leave the videos on. Okay, so now we're looking at 2 and 3. So now let's again look for those snaps, and we'll hit play. And it looks like 2 might have been slightly ahead there. Yeah, that little blip there looks like the snap. So I'll move that slightly. Might have been too much. Let's zoom back in. And let's see how that is. Looks pretty good. And now we'll let it keep playing to make sure it's actually in sync. Not bad. Okay, so now let's go ahead and mute 3, and we'll unmute 1, and we'll turn off the video for 3, and turn on the video for 1. All right, so when I secretly redid part 1, I accidentally forgot to snap. So this is going to make this process a little bit more complicated for me than it needs to be. But hopefully you remembered to snap at least, and you don't have to deal with this problem. So I'll see you back when I have these videos in sync. All right, I have managed now to get all of my parts synced up. So when I go ahead and hit play, you can also use the spacebar, by the way, to hit play. Not bad. So now if I go ahead and unmute all of my audio channels and hit play, we should be pretty close. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to replace all of this audio with the rendered audio that we got out of Reaper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this rendered audio file and I'm going to drag it to its own audio track. Okay, so now it looks like I've got it down here. So now I need to go through a somewhat arduous process of actually aligning it manually. So the easiest way to do this is to just try to align the very starts of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom all the way into the beginning and try and see where my audio begins. Let's give that a shot. So I'm going to leave these all unmuted for right now, so we can really tell if things are aligned. I'm going to drag this up a little bit more. All right, let's see how this is. Okay, so it's already clear that this is starting well before, oh, there it is. It just didn't render earlier. Okay, so let's zoom in and let's match up the start of our rendered audio with the start of the camera audio for part 1. So that looks pretty close. All right, let's hear how that sounds. All right, that's pretty good actually. So now what we'll go ahead and do is we'll mute all of the audio tracks for the audio from our camera. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we'll only leave the rendered audio track unmuted. Okay? So what we should do right now is trim part 1, and we'll trim it to just around the start of our audio render, just like that, and you'll see it'll sort of snap into place when I get close. And we'll do the same thing with the end. Okay, and now we can move this down so we can see our other videos more clearly. And now that we've trimmed part 1, we can trim part 2 to part 1, and we'll trim 3, and we'll trim part 4. All right, now that we have trimmed our videos, what we're going to do is pull out a little bit to the left for each of our video clips, just so that we have a little extra context before we start to hear playing. All right, so now if I go ahead and start here, I have a little bit of a lead in. Okay, and we can do the exact same thing with the end here. Let's start to find where I put down my horn. Looks like it's about there. So this would be a good place for us to stop. So now I'll drag the end of each of these clips over to there. Fantastic. All right, so let's go ahead and bring this thing up so we can see all of our audio tracks, and then we're going to select all of them by clicking on all of them while holding down Control. 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to right-click on any one of these, and we're going to go to link clips. And what this will do is let us move all of these together as a unit. So we're going to go ahead and slide this all the way to the beginning. All right, and so now we are pretty much done editing. All right, so the final thing we're going to want to do is turn back on our video playback for parts 3 and 4. So now we see them in the preview window. Let's ensure that all of our audio except for this final quartet render is muted. We can skip over this Fusion tab now, and we can skip over this color tab unless we feel like color grading. In this audio tab here, we have kind of a similar interface to what we saw in Reaper. We can drag this out so we can see all of our audio tracks. And what we can do here is play a little bit, and let's see how we're doing in terms of audio level. So it looks here like even in the loudest things, we're really not getting much past, say, -8 dB full scale. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is boost the audio for track 5. That's our rendered file by around 6 dB. Let's start with that for now. And now let's see where we're at. All right, so now we are much closer to 0 dB full scale, but we really don't want is for our signal to go anywhere over 0. But our signal is looking much healthier now, so we are good to go. So now the final thing for us to do in this process is to head over to this Deliver tab. Okay, so now in this Deliver tab, what we're going to do is select which part of our project we want to be rendered in our final video. So I want my rendered video to end when all my clips are ending. So you can see this little gray bar up here. That's indicating which parts of the video are going to end up in our final video. And so I'm going to go ahead and drag this over to the end of my clips. Alternatively, I can move my playback head to the end of my clips and click O for out, and this will give us a little more precision about our endpoint. If I wanted to start somewhere else in my video, I can move my playback head somewhere and then click I, and you'll see it moves my in point for where I want my render to begin. But I want my render to start at the very beginning, so I'm going to move my playback head back to the beginning and hit I. And at the very end of my clips, I'm going to go ahead and click O. All right, so now let's come up to this box up here. And this is where we decide what format we want our video rendered in. So let's go ahead and click the YouTube button here to give us a good baseline. And so in this box up here, we can label our file name. So I'm going to call this 200330 trombone quartet final render. Our location will be the same folder that we've been working out of this whole time. So desktop, trombone quartet project, click save. Here we can decide our rendered video's output resolution. So I'm going to go and select 1920 by 1080 or 1080p. And here under format, I'm going to go ahead and select MP4. YouTube and Instagram typically recommend MP4, so we're going to go with that. And audio codec, we're going to select AAC. And we're going to skip uploading directly to YouTube. So our last real step is to click Add to Render Queue. And you'll see that now we have this pop up over here. And the last thing we need to do is make sure that it's highlighted in white by clicking on it, and then just go ahead and click Start Render. And I will see you back when it's done. Okay, so now we can see that our render has been successfully completed. And so let's save our project one final time. You can click File, Save. And now we can go ahead and quit DaVinci Resolve. So now when we go into our project folder, we should see this new video here pop up. And now this is the final video that has been output by DaVinci Resolve. So let's give it a listen and see how it turned out. Okay, so you'll see that there's a few imperfections. For instance, I didn't exactly line up all of my videos in quadrants perfectly. If I were trying to be super fancy, I would definitely spend a lot more time making sure everything's lined up. The other thing is that the colors don't quite match, so I could have gone in there and adjusted that. We could have added reverb or EQ, but that's okay. This is really just a test project to help you all create your own videos, so hopefully your video will end up looking a little bit cleaner than mine. So at this point, we can just go ahead and upload our video directly to YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook. We can get rid of these extra files in our project folder now that we have our final render, unless we are planning on revisiting this later on. But that's about all I have to say. Thanks for sticking around, and I hope this video tutorial helped you in some way, and I look forward to watching the videos that you create. Happy recording.